I never thought I'd be the kind of man who worried about his wife's loyalty. Laura and I had been married for 7 years, and while we'd had our share of ups and downs, I always believed in the strength of our relationship. We weren't perfect, no couple is, but what we had felt real, solid. At least that's what I told myself. Looking back, I should have noticed the signs earlier. They weren't glaring at first, just small things, subtle shifts that, on their own, might not have meant much. But as they began to pile up, I couldn't ignore them anymore. It started with her phone. Laura used to text me throughout the day, little things, a funny meme, a reminder to pick up milk, a quick hope you're having a good day that always made me smile. But then the messages slowed down. At first, I told myself she was just busy. She had recently taken on more responsibilities at work, and I figured she was simply focused. But then the text stopped altogether. When I sent her a message, hours would pass before she responded, if she responded at all. Calls went straight to voicemail. And when she finally did reply, her messages were clipped, distant. Sorry, swamped today. Can't talk. In a meeting. We'll talk later. But later never came. Then she started staying late at the office more often. Laura had always been dedicated to her job, but this was different. Big project, she told me. I have to put in extra hours. I didn't question it. I wanted to be a supportive husband, and if she needed to work late, so be it. But then 2 nights a week turned into 3. Then 4. She'd leave early in the morning, sometimes before I even woke up, and wouldn't come home until nearly midnight. And when she was home, she wasn't really there. She barely looked at me. Our conversations became one-sided. I'd ask about her day, and she'd give me vague, mechanical answers before retreating to the bedroom. I wanted to believe it was just stress. Maybe she was overwhelmed at work, maybe she was dealing with something she wasn't ready to talk about yet. But deep down, doubt had already started creeping in. Then came the physical changes. Laura had always had a great sense of style, but lately, it had gone up a level, expensive new outfits, ones I had never seen before. I noticed she had changed her perfume too, something sultry, more alluring than the floral scent she had worn for years. She started wearing makeup even when she wasn't going anywhere special. When I asked about it, she just shrugged. I like looking nice. That was fine. Nothing wrong with wanting to feel good about yourself. But why now? And why was she suddenly so protective of her phone? Laura had never been secretive about it before. We knew each other's passcodes. If she left it on the couch and I needed to check something, it wasn't a big deal. But now she kept it on her at all times. If I so much as glanced in its direction, she'd pick it up. She always made sure the screen was turned away from me. One night I casually asked, "Everything okay? You've been on your phone a lot lately." Her reaction was immediate. She locked the screen and placed it face down on the table. "Just work stuff," she said quickly. "Nothing important." Her tone was off. Too defensive. I tried to brush it off, but my gut told me something was wrong. And the gut is rarely wrong. Then came the night that changed everything. It was a Friday. I had barely seen Laura all week. Every night she'd come home late, give me a quick peck on the cheek and head straight for the shower. She barely spoke to me. Barely touched me. I felt like a stranger in my own marriage. That night, I was already in bed when I heard the front door unlock. I checked my phone. 1:07 a.m. She had told me she'd be home by 10. I sat up as she walked into the bedroom, and for the first time in a long time, I really looked at her. She was wearing a dress I had never seen before, sleek, elegant, the kind meant to be noticed. Not something you'd wear to a late-night meeting. Her hair was styled in soft waves. Her makeup was still fresh, untouched despite the late hour. And then there was the scent, subtle but unmistakable. Men's cologne. Not mine. I stared at her as she set her purse down, avoiding my gaze like she already knew what I was thinking. My heart pounded, but I kept my voice calm. "You're late." She barely looked at me. "Yeah, sorry." The meeting ran long. "A meeting," I repeated, letting the word linger. She nodded, slipping off her heels. "Yeah. It was last minute. I didn't want to bother you." I watched her move toward the bathroom, my mind racing. Everything about her screamed deception. The way she wouldn't meet my eyes, the casual way she brushed past me, like she was trying to avoid any more questions. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But something inside me cracked that night. As the bathroom door closed and the shower turned on, I sat there in the dark, staring at the door, my thoughts spiraling. She was lying to me. And for the first time, I knew I had to find out the truth. The next morning, she was already up when I woke. She moved around the kitchen with ease, humming softly to herself, scrolling through her phone. When she noticed me, she smiled. "Morning," she said, setting a cup of coffee in front of me. I studied her, searching for any sign of guilt, any hesitation. But she was unreadable. Like the night before had never happened. "You got home late," I said casually. She took a sip of coffee. "Yeah, told you, the meeting ran long." I nodded slowly. "Late night work meetings, dressed like that?" Her fingers tightened around the mug, just for a fraction of a second. So quick I almost missed it. Then she let out a soft chuckle. "Ethan, you're making it sound shady. I went out with some colleagues after. A couple of drinks, that's all." "That's all." Such a casual dismissal, like it wasn't worth a second thought. It almost made me question myself. Almost. I let it go. For now. Pressing her wouldn't get me anywhere. If she was lying, she'd only double down. So I did something I never thought I'd have to do in my own marriage. I decided to find out the truth myself. Later that day, while Laura was in the shower, I picked up her phone from the nightstand. My hands felt clammy as I swiped up. Just as I expected. The passcode had changed. I wasn't sure why that hurt as much as it did. For years we had nothing to hide. If she needed to check something on my phone, she could. If I needed hers, it wasn't a big deal. But now she had locked me out. I put the phone back exactly as it was, my heart hammering. That was my first answer. She was definitely hiding something. Since I couldn't get into her phone, I tried a different approach. I logged into our phone bill account, scanning for any unusual numbers. And then I saw it. An unknown number. Over and over again. Hundreds of messages. Dozens of calls. I did a quick search, and felt my stomach drop. The number belonged to Jason Miller. Her ex. I stared at the screen, my chest tightening. Jason. The one who had come before me. The one she had always said ended too soon. The what if? And suddenly, I knew. This wasn't just in my head. I wasn't imagining things. I was losing her. I never thought I'd be the kind of man to doubt his wife's loyalty. For 7 years, Laura and I had built a life together, navigating the highs and lows that come with marriage. We weren't perfect, no couple is, but I had always believed in us. I believed in the foundation we had laid, in the love that had carried us through rough patches. At least that's what I told myself. Looking back now, I should have noticed the signs earlier. They weren't glaring at first, just subtle shifts, small things that on their own seemed insignificant. But as they began to accumulate, the weight of them became impossible to ignore. It started with her phone. Laura used to text me throughout the day, little things, a funny meme, a reminder to pick up milk, a simple "hope you're having a good day" that never failed to make me smile. But then the messages slowed. At first, I dismissed it as work stress. She had recently taken on more responsibilities at her firm, and I figured she was just preoccupied. But soon the texts stopped altogether. When I messaged her, the responses were delayed, sometimes hours, sometimes not at all. Calls went straight to voicemail. When she finally did reply, her messages were clipped, distant. "Sorry, swamped today. Can't talk. In a meeting. We'll talk later." But later never came. Then came the late nights. Laura had always been dedicated to her job, but suddenly work consumed her. At first it was twice a week. Then 3 times. Then 4. She'd leave before I even woke up and return close to midnight. And when she was home, she wasn't really there. She barely looked at me. Conversations were hollow, one-sided. When I asked about her day, her answers were vague, almost rehearsed, before she'd disappear into the bedroom. I wanted to believe it was just stress. Maybe she was overwhelmed, dealing with something she wasn't ready to talk about. But deep down, something gnawed at me. A quiet, insistent whisper that told me something was wrong. Then came the changes, the kind that were harder to ignore. Laura had always been stylish, but suddenly she had a whole new wardrobe. Expensive outfits, designer heels. Her perfume changed too, something sultry, alluring, a stark contrast to the soft floral scent she'd worn for years. She started wearing makeup even on days she had no plans. When I asked about it, she just shrugged. "I like looking nice," she said. That was fine. There was nothing wrong with wanting to feel good about yourself. But why now? And why did she suddenly guard her phone like it held the world's deepest secrets? We had always known each other's passcodes. If she left her phone on the couch and I needed to check something, it was never a big deal. But now she kept it on her at all times. If I so much as glanced in its direction, she'd pick it up, turning the screen away from me. One night I casually asked, "Everything okay? You've been on your phone a lot lately." Her reaction was immediate. She locked the screen and placed it face down on the table. "Just work stuff," she said quickly. "Nothing important." Her voice was tight, too defensive. A normal conversation shouldn't feel like an interrogation. My gut twisted. And the gut is rarely wrong. But the night that shattered everything was a Friday. I had barely seen Laura all week. Every night she came home late, barely kissed me, barely touched me. I I felt like a ghost in my own marriage. That night, I was already in bed when I heard the front door unlock. I checked my phone. 1:07 a.m. She had told me she'd be home by 10. I sat up as she entered the bedroom, and for the first time in a long time, I really looked at her. She was wearing a dress I had never seen before, sleek, elegant, something meant for a night out, not a late meeting. Her hair was styled in soft waves, her makeup still flawless despite the hour. And then there was the scent, subtle but unmistakable. Men's cologne. Not mine. She set her purse down, avoiding my gaze, her movements too careful, too deliberate. "You're late," I said. She barely looked at me. "Yeah, sorry." The meeting ran long. I let the silence stretch. "A meeting," I repeated. She nodded, slipping off her heels. "It was last minute. I didn't want to bother you." I watched as she moved toward the bathroom, my mind racing. Everything about her screamed deception. The way she wouldn't meet my eyes, the casual brush past me, as if she were trying to avoid further questions. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But something inside me cracked that night. As she disappeared into the bathroom, I heard the shower turn on. I sat in the dark, staring at the door. My heart pounded, my thoughts spiraling. She was lying to me. And for the first time, I knew I needed to find out the truth. The next morning, she moved around the kitchen with an ease that felt almost practiced, like the night before had never happened. She hummed softly as she scrolled through her phone, only looking up to hand me a cup of coffee. "Morning," she said with a smile. I studied her. "You got home late," I said carefully. She sipped her coffee. "Yeah, I told you." The meeting ran long. I nodded slowly. "Right. Late night work meetings. Dressed like that." For the briefest moment, so quick I almost missed it, her fingers tightened around her mug. Then she forced a laugh. "Ethan, you're making it sound shady. I went out with some colleagues after. A couple of drinks, that's all." Such a casual dismissal. Almost enough to make me question myself. Almost. But I knew better. Later that day, while she was in the shower, I took her phone from the nightstand. My hands were clammy as I swiped up. Passcode changed. I wasn't sure why that hurt as much as it did. For years we had nothing to hide. If she needed my phone, she took it. If I needed hers, it was no big deal. But now I was locked out. I placed the phone back, my heart hammering. That was my first real answer. She was hiding something. Since I couldn't get into her phone, I tried another approach. I logged into our phone bill account, scanning for unusual numbers. There it was. An unknown number. Over and over again. Hundreds of messages. Dozens of calls. I ran a quick search. My stomach dropped. Jason Miller. Her ex. I stared at the screen, my chest tightening. Jason, the one she had always said ended too soon. The one who, in another life, she might have ended up with. Maybe it was innocent. Maybe he was just an old friend reaching out. But people don't text and call their old friends at 1 a.m. Not like this. I needed more. A few days later, when Laura told me she had another late meeting, I waited until she left before grabbing my keys and following her. Her car took the usual route, until she turned into a high-end residential complex. I parked down the street and watched as she got out, fixing her hair in the window's reflection. She looked excited. Then Jason stepped outside. She smiled. He smiled back. Then, as if it was the most natural thing in the world, he reached out and brushed his fingers over hers. It was brief, but it was enough. I took a breath, steadying myself. I didn't storm in. I didn't yell. I took out my phone, snapped a few photos, and drove away. That night, as she kissed me on the cheek and whispered, "Don't wait up," I looked at her. And I knew. Tomorrow I'd see a lawyer. I stood there, holding the folder, divorce papers neatly stacked and ready, the culmination of everything I had known for weeks, months even. I placed it on the table in front of her with deliberate calm, the weight of it almost suffocating in its silence. "This is happening," I said, my voice steady but final. "I suggest you start looking for a place to stay." Laura's lip quivered, the tears welling up in her eyes too slow to stop. "Ethan, please no." Her plea was weak, fragile, like something shattered she was desperately trying to piece back together. But I wasn't moved. I had been shattered long before this. I didn't answer her. I wasn't sure there was anything left to say. Instead, I turned my back on her, walking away from the only person I thought I knew, from the life I thought I had. The room was silent behind me, but my heart was anything but. It pounded in my chest, loud enough to drown out everything else. But I didn't slam the door. I didn't shout or scream. I just left. Because for the first time in weeks, I knew exactly what I needed to do. That night, sleep eluded me. I couldn't escape the image of Laura's face, the panic that washed over her when I showed her the pictures, the tremble in her voice when she finally admitted the truth. 3 months. 3 months of deception. I should have felt a sense of victory. I had been right all along. The signs, the gut feeling, the suspicion, all justified. But knowing the truth didn't lessen the pain. If anything, it made it worse. It twisted something inside me, reminding me of the betrayal, the lies she had so effortlessly woven around us. I barely slept. I must have drifted off for a few hours though, because when I woke up, the house was eerily quiet. No sounds of her bustling around, no smell of coffee filling the air. Just the heavy silence that hung over everything. For a moment, I wondered if she had packed her things and left for Jason's, but the thought was quickly interrupted by soft footsteps outside the door, followed by a gentle knock. I stared at the ceiling, my breath slow and deliberate, trying to calm the storm raging inside me. "Can we talk?" Her voice, small and uncertain, filtered through the door. I didn't want to do this. I didn't want to hear her explanations, her excuses. But some twisted part of me wanted closure, wanted to see if there was any sliver of truth left in her words. Reluctantly, I opened the door. Laura stood there, looking like she hadn't slept either. Her eyes were red and swollen, the kind of tired you only get after a night full of regret. She wore the oversized hoodie she always wore to bed, like a shield against the world. For a long moment, she just looked at me as if she was searching for something, anything, to say. But no words came. Finally, she stepped back and gestured toward the couch. "Can we sit down?" I followed her but didn't sit beside her. Instead, I took the chair across the room, putting distance between us, forcing myself not to get lost in the familiar comfort of her presence. She noticed, and her fingers twisted together in her lap, her gaze fixed firmly on the floor. "I don't even know where to start," she whispered. "Try the truth," I said, my voice flat, betraying none of the emotions that threatened to rise. Her eyes met mine for a moment, the pain in them unmistakable. "I never wanted to hurt you, Ethan," I scoffed. "That's not the truth. That's damage control." She swallowed hard, fighting to hold herself together. "I'm not trying to make excuses." "Good," I replied sharply. "Because there aren't any." She nodded, drawing a shaky breath. "I was lonely." The words hit me like a slap, but I forced myself to stay still. The bitterness bubbled up, though, threatening to break the fragile calm I had tried to maintain. "Lonely? Lonely?" I repeated. "So your solution was to sleep with him?" Her face twisted in pain, tears flooding her eyes. "I didn't plan for it to happen, Ethan. It started as just talking. We reconnected and Her voice faltered as she shook her head, unable to finish. I knew the words she wanted to say before she even spoke them. "He made me feel special. He made me feel wanted." The unspoken truth hung in the air between us, sharp and unforgiving. I leaned forward, my forearms resting on my knees as I looked at her. "So let me get this straight. Instead of talking to me, your husband, you turned to him? Instead of telling me how you were feeling, you cheated?" Her face crumpled and she covered her mouth, stifling the sobs. "I know I should have told you. I should have, but—" "You didn't," I interrupted, my voice eerily calm, cold. "You made a choice, Laura. Over and over again. You chose to lie. To sneak around. To sleep in our bed knowing you had just been with him." She collapsed into her hands, unable to meet my gaze. "I hate myself for what I did," she whispered. I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of the moment pressing on me. I didn't feel angry anymore. Not like I thought I would. All I felt was an empty, hollow ache. A sense that this was the end. "I don't care how guilty you feel, Laura," I said, my voice steady. "You don't get to make this my problem." She lifted her head, her lips trembling. "Is there any chance that we can fix this?" I let out a bitter laugh. "Are you serious?" She nodded, desperate. "I know I don't deserve another chance, but I love you, Ethan. I don't want to lose you." I shook my head slowly. "You already did." Her face crumpled further, her tears falling faster. "Please? I'll do anything. I'll cut him off, I'll go to therapy, But I was already shaking my head. "No." My voice was firm, unshakable. "We're done." The words fell between us like a heavy curtain, and for a long moment she just looked at me, unable to speak. I turned away from her, walking toward the guest room. "I'm leaving for a few days," I said, the decision already made. Her head snapped up. "What?" I gestured toward the door. "I already packed a bag. I'll stay at a hotel while we figure out the logistics." Her shoulders slumped, as if the weight of it all had suddenly crushed her. "Ethan, please," she pleaded. I shook my head. "This isn't up for discussion." I saw the argument in her eyes, but she didn't fight it. She must have seen the resolve in my face, the finality in my steps. She nodded, swallowing hard as she watched me grab my bag from the guest room. And as I left, I couldn't shake the feeling that the life I had once known, had once loved, was already slipping away piece by piece.